Please welcome to the stage the President of the Intelligence and National Security Alliance, Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg.
Thank you. Our voice of God this evening is an INSA graduate student intern looking for a job in the intelligence community. So I would encourage everybody to get to know before the end of the evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am pleased to welcome you to INSA's first leadership dinner of 2022. I hope you all enjoyed the reception. Please feel free to start on your salads, but save room for dessert. CACI is our dessert reception sponsor this evening. John Sherman, General Ashley, and I would all be very, very grateful if you could keep the conversation to a minimum. I threatened to have an air horn under the podium this evening to utilize if you did not. Tonight, we are delighted to host the Honorable John Sherman, Chief Information Officer at the Department of Defense. John, we thank you for your leadership, for your service to our nation, and for making time to be here to speak to both our members and our guests. I know the audience looks forward to hearing from you and learning about your priorities and ways industry and academia can help your team achieve mission success. Briefly, I would like to recognize our corporate members whose sponsorship is near and dear to my heart. Accenture Federal Services, Amazon Web Services, CACI, Mantech, Oracle, Quadrant, Raytheon Intelligence and Space, Rancher Government Solutions, Sandbox AQ, SAIC, SIM Software, and TransUnion. And also a special thanks to former DIA Director General Bob Ashley for leading the moderated Q&A later this evening. Welcome back to town. We're glad to have you. We also welcome our friends from the media who are in attendance tonight. I am sure the press will have questions for our guests tonight, as many of you all will as well. When you think of one, please write them down on the question cards on your tables, and our amazing INSA graduate student interns, who I may have mentioned earlier, are looking for jobs in the public and private sector, would be happy to collect them. To introduce our speaker, please join me in welcoming Greg Grabowski, Director, Cybersecurity Intelligence Services at Raytheon Intelligence and Space.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for coming this evening. It's an honor to be here and to support INSA and the work they do every day to advance collaborative approaches to the challenges facing our national security. Organizations like this are vital to building relationships and sharing constructive solutions across industry and the federal government to ensure the continued defense of our nation. At Raytheon Intelligence and Space, we are proud to be committed as a partner in providing cutting-edge solutions across the intelligence, cyber, and electronic warfare disciplines in defense of our nation's information technology infrastructure. We believe in the one team, one fight philosophy and consider our role in that effort both a privilege and a deep responsibility. We look forward to continuing our active participation with all of you in INSA and solving the toughest national security problems as efficiently, effectively, and affordably as possible. I am honored this evening to introduce a truly exceptional leader of our community and a great American who has committed 30 years of his life to the defense of this nation. John Sherman was sworn in as the Department of Defense Chief Information Officer in December of 2021. In this capacity, he is the principal advisor to the Secretary of Defense for information management, information technology, and information assurance, as well as non-intelligent space systems, critical satellite communications, navigation and timing, programs, spectrum, and telecommunications. Previously, Mr. Sherman served as the DoD's acting CIO and principal deputy CIO. Before joining the department, he served as the intelligence community CIO from 2017 to 2020. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable John Sherman to the podium.
Good evening, everybody. It is such an honor to be here with you tonight. I'd like to thank INSA for hosting this evening, for the corporate sponsors for your support, and then all the attendees tonight. I'm seeing so many colleagues, both present and former colleagues I've had the privilege to work with at DoD and the intelligence community and elsewhere. I'm really glad to be here in person for this event. I think you all are too, after so many months and couple years of not being able to do things like this. It is a wonderful evening to be here with you. So I've got a few remarks, about 15 minutes, and then we're going to eat, and then I'm going to come up here for a kind of between two ferns sort of thing with my friend and colleague, Bob Ashley. But I want to make a few remarks here and just kind of set the stage for the sort of questions I think Bob's going to be asking me here. So to start with something here, like many of you, my eyes are getting a little bit worse. So I recently got new glasses, which I'm still adapting to, as Annie Redmond found out a few minutes ago when I didn't recognize her from just a few feet away. But I was also in the Pentagon, out in the little lockbox getting my phone out of the little lockbox, and I saw an individual coming down with a bag over their shoulder. From a distance, I thought it was somebody from R&E or A&S heading to the gym, until they got a little closer and I noticed they were Ash Carter, the former SecDef, who was in the building making some meetings, holding some meetings. And I, kind of did the pop to attention. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you in the building, sir. And he had some very kind comments. And then he asked me a question I get occasionally, but it really stuck hearing it from former Secretary Carter. He said, "John, how's it going as CIO? Haven't had a chance to talk to you since you got confirmed." And that really stuck with me. And I want to share with you, how's it going as CIO now that I'm in the position confirmed? Now, one thing I'll say, having been the IC CIO for 3 years and now at the Department of Defense, I'll bet you this is like no other CIO job in the world, being the DoD CIO. And that's not to toot anybody's horn here or try to say anything specific about the level of the job, but in terms of the scope and responsibilities of leading an IT enterprise that spans 4 million women and men, service members, civilians, contractors, who all provide for our nation's defense. And also, the scope of what the CIO position entails, there's the standard stuff we're all aware of as we think about compute, transport, cybersecurity. But the command control communications piece, I would argue, is almost unique, that supports our warfighters as we prepare for our pacing challenge and other threats. Now, I think right now in history, we're at a very interesting time. It feels to me, and I could be wrong, it feels almost like those years right before World War II we've read about, where technology was changing. Biplanes were turning into monoplanes. New technologies like sonar and radar were being developed. Storm clouds were on the horizon. Something was changing. It also feels a bit like the years I've learned about after the Vietnam conflict, after we had come out of the jungles of Vietnam, and as we were preparing to retrench for the Cold War. Something was different. And I would argue right now, something is definitely different. As we look around, digital technology pervades everything we do. We hear about AI, we hear about cloud, we hear about commercial SATCOM. Things are changing. We see what's going on in the Ukraine conflict. We're at an inflection point, and that term is often overused, but in the digital and cyber and C3 space, something is different. I'm honored to be in the CIO seat, following an incredible group of women and men who have preceded me in this position. In our office, we have etched images of their photographs that are on our walls here, going back many, many years. And I look at my predecessors, Dana Deasy, Essie Miller, John Zangardi, Terry Halverson, Terry Takai, many going back years, and names very familiar to this group here, Joan Dempsey, acting ASD for C3, Art Money, and others you would recognize who are heroes to all of us. It's a big responsibility, and as I look back, there's been changes in technologies, changes in strategy, changes in administration, but our goals have always been the same. Keep our service members safe downrange and ensure the Department of Defense is the most effective organization in the world to keep this nation safe. So as we think about this inflection point we're at, I want to talk just for a second, and we'll set this for what Bob and I are going to talk about. What are we doing in DoD CIO? Where are our priorities? How are we keeping us safe? So there's a few areas I want to emphasize. First and foremost is cybersecurity. If we can't keep our systems, our data, and our infrastructure safe, then none of the rest is going to work out. Now, this doesn't mean the other areas are not priorities, but cybersecurity, working with Paul Nakasone, working with other stakeholders throughout the enterprise, is among the highest responsibilities I have. What are we doing on this front? We are implementing Zero Trust at scale, and our intent is to be a leader in the federal government in this area. Of course, President Biden put out an executive order last year putting Zero Trust out there for the entire federal government. I see you've got my chart up here behind me on some of the main priorities. We're going to get this right at DoD here. We've got a new portfolio management office stood up, and we're taking what the services have already done. We're working with NSA and Cybercom and DISA and others to make sure we get this right, where we assume the enemy is already on our network. We're going to box that enemy in and not let him move laterally across our networks. We're going to employ micro-segmentation, new types of censoring. We're not just going to defend at the perimeter or even a defense in depth. We're going to implement this new principle in a way that's never been done before, and I need your partnership between government and industry and academia to get this right. We're going to get after technical debt on weapon systems, on things that we didn't have to get after as we were getting after targets in Al-Anbar province, over Marja, East Africa, and other places we've been fighting violent extremists for the past 20 years. But as we pivot to facing our pacing challenge and other great state near-peer adversaries, we've got to think differently as we work with our program managers and PEOs on areas like cybersecurity, technical debt, cryptography, and other things that we maybe didn't get after with the alacrity that we needed to, but we must do it now with the utmost urgency. We're also going to make sure that we work with you all in the defense industrial base for DIB cybersecurity. Recently, the Cyber Maturity Model certification moved over from an acquisition and sustainment leadership over to my office. I recognize full well CMMC is a controversial topic, but it's a necessary one as we work to protect our federal contract information and our controlled unclassified, or CUI, information. And we are not going to let the Chinese or the Russians rob us anymore of our blueprints, our plans, or other things that are going to put our service members at risk in a future scenario. Now, thank you. There's often I see on social media and elsewhere that DoD needs to walk the walk on the talk we're talking. And I can promise you from the CIO seat, we're at full afterburner on this. This is my utmost priority on cybersecurity with Zero Trust and getting after the tech debt. And there are nearly 300,000 companies in the defense industrial base. And as we work across, and not only looking at the large companies, but also the small and medium businesses, and not just those that are here in the Beltway, but those who are in the Midwest, the South, the Northeast, the Northwest, and all across this great nation here, and those that may only have 100 or fewer employees, those that maybe have a little bit bigger, maybe those have a robust CISO and maybe those that don't. And how do we come at this differently? How can we do things perhaps like cybersecurity as a service, and we're offering that up? Perhaps providing cloud-based capabilities that are accredited to NIST 800, 171, and 172. These are ideas that we're working through, but the main thing is I want to listen. I want to put myself in the shoes of the CEOs and the CIOs and the CISOs of those companies to make this work. But the one thing we're not going to do is let our guard down. As my colleague and friend Jen Easterly says at CISA, our shields had better be up all the time, and I need your help with this. Now, additionally, with cybersecurity, providing world-class computing is priority. Now, we have a lot of progress in this area as we look at what we've done across the military services of what we call fit-for-purpose clouds in the Department of the Army, in the Department of the Air Force, and the Department of the Navy. But we're moving out with absolute urgency with the Joint Warfighting Cloud Capability, or JWCC. JWCC replaces JEDI. I know JEDI was in the news a lot. When we had to pivot off of that, it made a lot of news last year. I'll tell you this, JEDI, when it was conceived, was the right idea for the right time. But the state of technology has changed. The way enterprises work have changed. So I'm not going to throw JEDI and my predecessors under the bus. That was a noble effort, and they put their shoulder into it. But we're moving out with a multi-cloud, multi-award effort with JWCC aiming to make the awards in December. And it is so critical we get this right for Joint All-Domain Command and Control, for the AI and Data Accelerator that's going to span the COCOMs, having unclassed, secret, and top secret cloud capabilities that span from CONUS all the way out to the tactical edge. And we say tactical edge, that could be on an island in the Western Pacific. It could be on a ship. It could be at a forward air base. It could be on a submarine. We've got to get this right, and we're going to be pressing our not only CSP colleagues, but all across the technology enterprise to get this right. Now, I mentioned C3. C3 is among also the highest responsibilities I have. And I'll be honest with you, coming over from the IC, I had worked transport, some satellite communications, but nothing like we have at the Department of Defense. Nothing like it all. As we look at things like positioning, navigation, and timing, or PNT, for which GPS has been and remains our gold standard. And I'm so thankful for our Space Force colleagues for all they do to make sure that works. But we got to be ready for wily adversaries who may be able to affect GPS, particularly in a war zone. We have to have alternate and complementary sources. Look at working with organizations like NGA for research and engineering at OSD and others as we bring these capabilities in. So when the F-35 is rolling in on that SAM target and the pilot reaches down to pickle off her round to take out that SAM, maybe her GPS has been affected, but she doesn't even know because the alternate and complementary sources are coming into her cockpit and she's able to get the mission done. That's one of the highest responsibilities we have. Additionally, I talked about SATCOM. We need to diversify our SATCOM capabilities. There are so many commercial offerings in LEO and elsewhere now. That doesn't mean we still don't need the government offerings, but we need to be able to tap into the commercial capabilities and frustrate our adversaries' ability to target and take out that capability. Additionally, electromagnetic spectrum operations recently came over to my office to lead a major portion of this. Now, we're working closely with Strategic Command, the services, and others. IMSO, I know, kind of sounds wonky, and why does that matter? Because we're going to have to be able to operate in a highly contested environment. In an environment I would argue our forces have not had to operate in perhaps since the Vietnam War. Different time, different technology, but being able to come in on targets that are highly contested with a very sophisticated adversary and being able to invest in areas with that marriage of electronic warfare and spectrum operations in a way that we haven't perhaps done in quite a while. Also, not to be forgotten is what we're doing in software. As we've just issued a new software modernization strategy, we've got to think differently about this. Now, I know from my seat as the DoD CIO, I'm not putting a hand on a keyboard. We're not doing this. It's the women and men out there at the software factories that the services have all across this nation. It is instantiating a DevSecOps mentality that we can get after this. It's having standards on things like containerization and making sure we have the skill sets to get after things like acquisition strategies for software and how we can do DevSecOps, and also leveraging cloud first, like with JWCC. And I mentioned digital talent. We talk so much about the technology, it is about the people. We need to think differently about how we get after digital and cyber talent. No longer are 30-year careers, I think, going to be the norm. They're not right now. We've got to diversify our workforce. We need a workforce that looks like America. We've got to recruit in different areas. We've got to be able to think about differently on our educational requirements at times. We've got to work every authority that Congress has given us to be able to get after this, to have a more diverse, capable workforce. You hear terms like Manhattan Project and so on get overused, but if we don't do this right on cyber, we're going to regret that we didn't lean into this harder. And we have to do this with all of you. We need to think differently on how we recruit, retain, upskill, and then be able to allow individuals to move between industry and government in a more fluid way that heretofore has not been possible. And then finally, there are other areas we work. I've hit a few of the key ones. We talk about SAP IT, Special Access Program IT. I just spoke down in Huntsville, down there to a SAP IT conference where many of the representatives from companies represented here tonight were there. We talked about what we're doing to bolster that area. We're getting after defense business systems, working with Comptroller and others to get after efficiencies there. And a biggie, user experience. I know UX has been in the news so much since we've heard about the Fix Our Computers piece out on social media, and I appreciated that. So I have a lot of NGA and CIA colleagues in here, and they probably know I was the one on the other end of that for many years at the Washington Navy Yard and Fort Belvoir and Langley, saying, what did you do to my system here? Why can't I pull up my soft copy imagery? How dare you? Now, looking at user experience, I think many of you are aware, and I've learned this, it's a multifaceted story. It involves better hardware. Yep, it involves better software. Transport, both long haul and on the base garrison and the installation, which gets into service equities. Could be the operating system you're running on there, and it could be the cybersecurity scans we're running, which I can't affect. But it's a potpourri of issues, but it comes down to that Marine at Pendleton, that airman at Tinker, that sailor at Norfolk, that guardian at Peterson, that soldier at Fort Stewart, or that civilian at the Pentagon, who is watching the little wheel spin around where they're trying to pull down their maintenance report or get something ready, or maybe that Intel analyst who's got the J2 knocking on their door right now going, hey, we got to go brief the boss, let's get going. We get it. And I'm working closely with the military department CIOs, the sixes and others on how we get after this problem. And I can promise you Deputy Secretary Hicks is very committed to this as well. And that brings me to the how. How do we get after this? It's teamwork within the department. I see many of my colleagues here sitting that are on meetings with us almost every day as we get after this, working across the mil depths, the services, the defense agencies and field activities, the combatant commands. One team, one fight, we say, and we mean it because we're not going to get it all done from OSD. We're going to percolate up ideas. We're going to have, as my Army CIO colleague Raj Iyer says, positive friction. And I'm not going to rubber stamp everything that they bring up, but by God, I'm going to hear what they have to say, and we're going to get after it. We're going to work with the interagency. We're going to work with the NSC. We're going to work with you all in industry and academia. We're going to work with other parts of OSD. We better lock arms and get after this, because our special sauce to be able to put the Chinese and Russians and others back on their heels is us. It's not the technology, it is our teamwork working together. Yes, the tech is going to get us there, but we've got to be able to work together. So, as we stand back and think about the strategic situation, I'm reminded of something I read a number of years ago that really affected me. It was talking about the pivot I mentioned after Vietnam as we moved to get ready to really put the end to the Soviet Union and ready for the later stages of the Cold War in the 70s and 80s. It was in 1973, and I know Mr. Allen has told me he was the deputy of the CIA task force for the 73 Arab-Israeli War. And right after that war, an Army team went over to the Sinai and the Golan to examine what had happened. And what they saw startled them. They saw the effect of the Sagar missiles on Israeli armor. They saw what SA-6s did to Israeli F-4 Phantom aircraft. It was a startling wake-up call. And out of that, active defense was born in 1975, and not long thereafter, the seeds of air-land battle, which defined how we would defend Europe in the 1980s. Now, we're seeing a lot of the same sort of lessons in Ukraine, and yeah, there's been focuses on Javelin missiles and in-laws and HIMARS and other kinetic weapon systems, but just as importantly, we've seen commercial SATCOM, how that's kept the internet up and running. So the information warfare fight with President Zelensky and the Ukrainians have been able to dominate that against Russia. We've seen cyber attacks against the Ukrainians, against targets in Europe. Recently, there was the piece about what the Russians have done against a SATCOM provider that spilled all the way over into Europe. We've seen the effect of commercial imagery and what our GeoInt colleagues have been able to do and the GeoInt service providers to be able to call out the Russians, what they're doing, and to get ahead of their false flag operations. So maybe it's almost digitally like we're those Army officers in 1973 wandering the deserts of the Sinai, seeing the knocked out tanks, seeing the crashed Israeli plane, saying, we better get busy here and change who we are. Something's different right now. We're at a pivot point. Let's get busy, and let's get ready to put our adversaries back on their heels. I look forward to talking to you up here with Bob Ashley, and thanks for all you do. I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Suzanne Wilson Heckenberg.
Hi, I hope everyone enjoyed dinner. Thank you for not making me pull out my air horn while John Sherman spoke. Before we resume our program, I just wanted to point out an event that we launched today that is near and dear to my heart. INSA and our foundation is hosting a virtual program entitled Fact and Fiction, Intelligence and National Security Careers, Mental Health and Clearances. I think it's a really important discussion, particularly in light of what so many of us have gone through over the past two and a half years. It will be a virtual event again, and it's on June 30th from 2 to 3. It's gratis. So I would encourage everybody to encourage their workforce, their teammates, their subordinates, their bosses to tune in for this important 1-hour discussion that we are delighted to be hosting for the community. But now it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator. General Bob Ashley will be moderating discussion tonight, as you know. His career, and I have to say, he's enjoying being the moderator versus the individual that's being questioned. So anyway, his career accomplishments are many, as you all know. Director of DIA, Army Deputy Chief of Staff, G2, command position at the company, battalion, squadron, and brigade levels with 6 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, to name a few of his leadership roles. He is no stranger to INSA. He served as our speaker at our March 2018 leadership dinner, and we are thrilled to have him this evening to moderate the discussion. So please join me in welcoming Bob Ashley, as well as John Sherman, to the stage.
Thank you. It's just like you and me up here, right?
It is, between two ferns here.
There you go. So for Suzanne and INSA, thanks for letting me be part of this. Truth in Lending, when Suzanne asked me to do this, I said, absolutely. But let me ask the Army ethics people first whether or not I can actually do this. So Truth in Lending, we were joking about this the other day because I got 4 months left in my cooling off period, so I've brought in 240 of my closest friends to bear witness that I'm not going to try to sell you anything in the course of our conversation. First, phenomenal remarks.
Thank you.
If you were running for office,
Thank you.
if you're running for office, I think our table was ready to vote, and so we're ready to move ahead with that. That was exceptional.
Thank you, Bob.
Because it was from the heart. And if you want somebody to be your CIO, you want a zealot. And you want somebody that comes up there and tells you what's on their mind, where they're going, and they're not reading a script. And that's what you got out of John. You got somebody who's a zealot. We're teammates from our time in the IC.
Absolutely.
As you moved into the acting role, and even actually for the CDAO
Right.
piece of that as well. And John and I exchanged emails. I sent him a congratulations, and I said, got a second hat? And he goes, yeah, I'm asking for a second parking spot. So
I drive
we'll
a
move
Ford
on from there.
F-150. It's big.
There you go. You lay out a lot of things. And so I want to kind of give you a chance to unpack some of those. Last week, the Army, General Funk said, hey, we're going to hold off on some doctrine that we're getting ready to publish because we're trying to understand lessons learned coming out of Ukraine. And it was very fortuitous that you were in 29 Palms. Yep. And so if you can share a little bit more about your experience in 29 Palms and, how does industry need to think about what we're facing inside the enemy's engagement space?
That's a great point. So I did have the privilege, at the invitation of General Glavy, the Deputy Commandant for Information, to visit 29 Palms to watch General Turner and the 1st Marine Division conduct a very large force-on-force exercise. Now, I know there's a lot of Marines in the room here. We got General Groen and many others. And 29 Palms has seen a lot of training over the years, and I've also been up to the National Training Center up at Fort Irwin. But what I was so impressed with was watching 1st Marine Division and the opposing force practice as though they're going against our pacing challenge. There's often questions in the Pentagon and maybe out in the media and elsewhere, are the military services making the pivot from counterinsurgency, fighting violent extremists, which are still a threat, to getting ready for near-peer competitor fights? And I can promise you what I saw out there with General Turner and the team was nothing short of impressive. Now, for some of you Cold Warriors who did deploy to NTC or Red Flag or other places like this, some of these things wouldn't have been different to you. Heavy use of camo netting, looking out for adversary ISR, making sure when they're transmitting on the handsets, 3 seconds on and off, things we were taught as lieutenants, but didn't much have to do maybe fighting counterinsurgency. But doing things like operating and practicing to operate in a highly contested MSO environment. Having the Space Force aggressor squadron on station out there to provide real-world interference on things. And then what I was super impressed with was going in the 1st Marine Division talking to the 6th crew, and they had a Space Force embed there working with SATCOM-related issues. The takeaway was, back to that inflection point I talked about, I saw it firsthand with the 1st Marine Division. And I'm very confident that if I saw an NTC or JRTC rotation, if I watched our pilots, our sailors, or others doing similar exercises and our guardians, we would be seeing the same thing. So take this away. The military is making the pivot to getting ready to survive and fight in the 1st or 2nd island chain, in the weapon engagement zone. It won't be easy, but I'm telling you, they're buckling up their helmets ready to do it, and it's going to be our obligation to support them when they do.
So let me kind of pivot that into another aspect of that, which is when you get denied, disrupted, and intermittent environments, because a lot of times we talk about communications, but we don't really put it in the context of what it means to be in a DDIL environment, and that is always going to be a challenge. And it's not necessarily that it's a kinetic kill. A lot of times it's non-kinetics, and you talked about cyber, but go a little bit more into how you think about non-kinetics and how we need to think about our networks.
So watching this, if I can, I'll talk a little more about 1st Marine Division, then take it larger. During the middle of the fight, they had F-35s on station, they had enemy air, OP-4 air. General Turner took a few minutes to come outside of his heavily camouflaged talk to show me his JLTV vehicle, and he was so proud to show me he had Starlink antenna out there, MUOS, Viasat. He had it rigged up, and this was all done by his 6. In an MCON environment, they were operating there. Yeah, that was impressive. But back to your question about a DDIL environment, practicing to fight in a denied area. As we think about edge compute, as General Hyten, the former vice chairman, used to say, we need to be thinking about being connected and disconnected and reconnecting. And that's going to be the life we're going to have potentially with our forces in those sort of areas there. We're going to have to press ourselves from a technology area. And this is where I'm going to have, we've got cloud service providers, but there's going to be other technology providers too that are going to work on this. Sometime, we have unique requirements in the Department of Defense, but I look at other economy sectors too, like the oil field and so on. They're not getting shot at, but they are operating in areas where you're going to have intermittent contact in very austere environments. So let's work together to leverage those sort of technologies to get our warfighters what they need. And finally, kind of to what I was talking about a highly contested environment in the electromagnetic spectrum space. We're working closely with the electronic warfare community, the spectrum community, bringing that together, but expecting potential adversaries in East Asia, in Europe, or anywhere else to be able to come at us in that environment in a way that we haven't seen in quite a few years. So I'm going to need your help from industry and academia from a technology perspective of thinking creatively how we operate in those austere environments.
So let me take that again to its next logical step. One of the things you highlighted is just the sheer human talent that we have, our ability to innovate. But one of the challenges we have is our ability to innovate falls within the rubric of the FARs and regulations and acquisition and the other processes, the 5000 series. And if Xi Jinping brought in his chief of acquisition this morning and said, I need 10 of the following widgets, he might have them by close of business. He'll probably have them by the next day. So as you look at that challenge, not only marrying that up with defense and industry, how do we innovate faster?
That's a great question, Bob. And I was just talking this recently as this morning with a new Chief Digital and AI Officer at the Pentagon, Dr. Craig Martell, who we just brought on board. Craig and I were chatting about this, and the Xi Jinping scenario and our pacing challenge, where he may say, I need 10 new data centers within a month. And either those 10 data centers are going to get built or heads might roll. We're not an authoritarian government. We are a democracy. We are going to have free market. We are going to have open competition. We're going to be Americans. We're going to live by our values here. But we're going to have to do this in a way that we're not going to necessarily come at this in 20th century sort of mechanisms here. I've done a lot of acquisition involved type work. I'm not an acquisition professional, but I do lean on them heavily. We're blessed to have Dr. Bill LaPlante as the Undersecretary for Acquisition Sustainment. And I can tell you, Deputy Secretary Hicks has been a strong advocate, working with Heidi Shue and R&E and elsewhere, of thinking differently about how we get after these issues. Not overusing OTAs, not overusing sole source, but thinking differently about how we get this all the way from an idea, before there's even an RFI or an RFP, through the valley of death, all the way over to employment, deployment, and use, to when that soldier's getting it in their hands going, all right, I've got the new thing that's been tested. You know, our colleagues at SOCOM and JSOC have blazed a path for us in some of these areas. Bob, I know you've worked in that environment quite a bit. We've got to think differently here. We've got to be able to get things deployed in time to be able to affect what we need to do. And I was just talking with Mr. Allen over dinner here. Time is not on our side on a lot of these things. The clock's ticking. So we've got to work between government and industry. We're going to adhere to law. We're going to be ethical about this. We're going to do it right. But we've got to be more agile how we get at this. And I'm open to working with you all on that.
Thanks, John. So CMMC.
Yep.
So there's some angst.
Yep.
In the community. Now, if you're a large prime, chances are this isn't something that's going to be a huge challenge for you. If you are a small or medium business, how should they be thinking about it, and how are you posturing to maybe help them get through this process?
So a few things I would note, Bob, and I take this very seriously. For background again, we in CIO got the CMMC responsibility last fall after ANS had this. And we took it on board, and you've heard the term CMMC 2.0. There's been a lot written about this online and elsewhere as we're trying to do things to take it from 5 levels to 3, trying to make it focus on NIST standards only and not layering on additional DoD standards with this. But let me just kind of be blunt with you here. I want to put myself in the shoes again of the CEO or CIO or CISO of the other companies and go, how the heck does this look? How am I going to adhere to this? Now, the one thing I've said over time in other settings is this is needed cybersecurity. It is something we've got to get after. And I know there's been some pushback about how hard this might be to achieve, things like multi-factor authentication, end-to-end security, everything that's in 800-171. But as I noted in my remarks, we can't not do this. We must do it. The Chinese are going to rob us blind otherwise. So back to the main question is, how are we going to empathize, put ourselves in the shoes of the folks on the receiving end? I am pushing my crew to look at things like what can we do above and beyond what Paul Nakasone is already providing through this, for example, the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center with a number of companies in terms of areas like some cybersecurity as a service, protective domain name services, some threat reporting, which he's already doing. We've got to expand this radically. I told you, 250,000 to 300,000 companies throughout the DIB. Many of them are small and mediums. What could we do, and we haven't decided on this yet, to provide some sort of cloud-based capability or at least accredit something where companies, if they're so willing, could put their data into this 800-171 already certified. I'm going to make this personal for you here. I grew up in South Texas. My family had a very small production company working in the oil field. And the regulations we worked with were more on environmental and energy production. But a lot of it was opaque. It was hard to do as we were laying 2-inch pipeline south of Houston and elsewhere. And so that wasn't in a technology setting, but it put me in a mindset of if I'm a small company in Kansas City or in Delaware or in Oregon or wherever it might be, how does this look? How the hell am I going to achieve this? So just know that we're taking this to heart. So on the timeline with this, it's going to be with OMB for rulemaking here shortly. I got to get all my terms right. And then about March of next year, knock on wood, we hope, that it'll be open for public comment, and that's where people are going to have a chance to weigh in. And I know there's a lot of back and forth on, will level 2 be bifurcated and, for third-party assessment and self-attestation? This is the kind of thing that's going to get worked out here. But just rest assured, my role as CIO, I want to make this as understandable as possible. I also, by the way, want to walk the walk. A lot of the reporting's been on some GAO reporting with this lately, that DoD, we're not quite making the mark. I'll tell you what I'm doing is hitting the afterburners, and I expect you all to do the same too. This has been a top priority for us. So know you've got an empathetic leader on this. We're not going to let off. We're not going to take our foot off the gas. But we're going to do this smartly, and we welcome feedback on this as we have various engagements from our CISO team and others to hear your feedback, to make sure we're not drinking our own bathwater on something, to make sure that this is understandable, but we're not letting our guard down either. So that's how we want to come at this.
So the last job I had, I ran JWIX,
Yep.
right? And then we worked in that in the IC space. So now you own SIPR. So talk a little bit about SIPR 2.0 and what's your vision for SIPRnet?
Absolutely. As I look out at the audience, I know a lot of people have either been in the military, supported the military, and I know SIPRnet's had a bit of a reputation in terms of its potential reliability, its cybersecurity, and obviously I can't get into the more classified aspects of this, but rest assured, as I work with General Paul Nakasone, I work with my 6 colleagues, some of whom are here tonight. As we work across the entire enterprise, we know that if something happens in the Indo-PACOM region tonight, and Admiral Aquilino, the Indo-PACOM commander, needs it, or General Walter needs it in EUCOM, it darn well better be there. Now, as we think about implementing things like Zero Trust, it's not just on the NIPRNet, we've got to get this right on the SIPRnet as well. We stood up a Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office, and some of you may have seen, we brought Randy Resnick in, 34-year NSA veteran, many of you know, almost Mr. Zero Trust, to help us get after this. That's going to be a key part of SIPRnet on where we're taking this. Also, it's not just about DoD. As we think about SIPR instantiations across the interagency, that could be areas where we may have vulnerabilities. We need to tighten that up as well. And finally, because we're still working this, I'm not going to get into a lot of the details, we're pressing the team to think creatively about how we get after this in terms of bolstering what we have, recapitalizing, or maybe even other things that we need to be thinking about how we get after this. I'm not going to make it easy on the enemy and give them what our plans are on this, but rest assured, we know SIPRnet has got to be there and reliable, and we know there's a little bit of, more than a little bit of work we got to do to get after it.
Thanks, John. So let me move into one of the hats that not everybody might realize that you have, which is your role in C3I.
Right.
And the relationship and how do we integrate better with the industry? Because with the military circles, we talk about a PACE plan. And we talk about, primary, alternate, contingency, and, emergency communications. As you look at commercial industry and you think about that PACE framework, how do you need them to integrate? How do you need industry to come to the table to work that?
We need interoperability. We need open architectures. I want you all to kind of proverbially sit with me here for a second. Think of it this way from the CIO view. Yeah, come on up. Is thinking about in an Indo-PACOM scenario where we've got a pacing challenge who does have ASAT capabilities, who has robust electronic warfare capabilities, who can really try to challenge us in spaces we haven't been challenged in, like with IMSO. We've got to be able to have as much diversity, interoperability, and optionality for our commanders that works together, that is rapidly integratable, that's a word, into our architectures in a way that offers the resiliency that will make it so hard for that pacing challenge to be able to cripple us or take us offline and frustrate their effort to put us into a constrained DDIL environment. So some of these areas I know are more niche than maybe some of the broader industry perspectives on as we look at cloud and transport and cyber. But this C3 area is going to be a key factor of whether we win or lose or come to a tie on something in terms of our ability to succeed. And we need that diversity of options, and this is where we're going to need your help on that.
Huge structural changes that are taking place inside the Defense Department with the stand-up the CDAO office. Matter of fact, you made a reference to you and Dr. Mattel had a forum this morning. The Jake is standing down. General Groen is doing the due diligence to make sure that transition is happening in a very responsible way. But help everybody understand what's your relationship to the CDO, and how are those lines being drawn?
Before we do, join me in giving Mike Groen a big round of applause for his leadership. Mike, thank you for all you've done with the JAKE. You created the foundation that enables CDAO, and thank you for your distinguished career, sir. CDAO is about decision advantage. It's about creating the technologies, the ecosystem, everything that's needed from Secretary Austin down to Deputy Secretary Hicks to our combatant commanders to our service members in the field to be able to get inside the adversary's decision loop. Now, warfighting is a key focus, but as we say, boardroom to the battlefield, it could be how we do business operations at DoD or one of the fourth estate agencies or elsewhere. This bringing together of the Joint AI Center, the Defense Digital Services, CDO, and the Advana team, bringing them together into an integrated, functional team now is really going to be able to, as like a baton handoff. I ran relay, but I wasn't that great in high school, but y'all know what I mean. Taking that baton from General Groen and the team and coming around the next lap on this. We are so lucky, too, to have picked up Dr. Martell from industry. He was the head of machine learning at Lyft. He gets how to do this at massive scale. And again, he's going to take that baton. And I can tell you, we at CIO, I was just talking about this on a broadcast with him today. Everything I talked about earlier with joint warfighting cloud capability, transport, cybersecurity will enable what he's doing at CDAO and has. And one other thing I'd like to comment on, CDAO was built while the plane was still flying. Mike's folks were doing incredible things on AI. The Advana team was doing things to support operations. The joint aspects with CDO and JAKE in the ADA teams, the AI and Data Accelerator, we're supporting General Walter, are supporting other combatant commands. And all this is coming together, but I think we've seen a glimmer of what the promise holds here. And by goodness, we better get this one right too, because our authoritarian challengers don't have the same scruples we do about gathering data and how they use it. But you know what? We're still going to have to outpace them, but we're going to have to do it with Western American democratic values. So ethical use of AI will be very important in all this. So I'm excited about what Dr. Martell is going to do, and I am just very grateful for Mike and the stakeholders who got us to where we are today.
So you kind of pointed at the audience and said, you're the most important thing out here. We talked about the human domain, what it means to grow human capital and expertise. So as you think about training the workforce that has to meet these challenges, what are you doing differently? And kind of what are some of your insights in terms of what the pandemic did to accelerate some of what you're doing with the workforce?
Well, let me start. You mentioned the pandemic, and I don't think this is a surprise to anyone. The hybrid workforce that we're all working between private sector, government.
Thanks.
No, those are the questions here. I don't know if that was like, tell Sherman to stop talking so much. You know, I've got to give my predecessor, Dana Deasy, and his colleagues credit. When COVID hit in April of 2020, pivoting very quickly to deploy remote work capabilities and working, for example, with former DISA Director Nancy Norton to reinforce transport and cybersecurity, to be able to get, frankly, several million employees and service members out of the buildings to be able to work from home was a monumental feat that I hope the history of DoD well captures. Building upon that with what we're doing now with collaboration capabilities, not only driven by COVID health situation, but just how we're going to work here by management decisions and realizing that employees we're going to be bringing on, as we talk right now, are not going to want to sit in a cubicle 5 days a week. Maybe they need to for some things if they're working TSSCI or need to be in a SCIF, but in terms of different types of work conditions, we need to think differently about this. Now, more broadly, as we think about talent and how we tap into our nation's potential on this, we've got to really think differently. Last April of 21, I was summoned down to the Senate Armed Service Committee Workforce Subcommittee, chaired by Senator Gillibrand, to really drill down on kind of where we are on all this. General Kral was there with me, the J6, and we talked about areas like how we categorize our skill sets, how we leverage cyber accepted service, how we work with Paul Nakasone on his NSA scholarship programs, and it was great. You know, we're implementing something called the 8140 policy series. Sounds kind of wonky, but that's how we're going to have the policy to get after this. But I came away from that and I said, do we have a strategy beyond what's in our cyber strategy? Had a few paragraphs, and we didn't. And so I asked our team, I said by next year, now here in 2022, I want to have a new workforce strategy that gets at how we're going to enhance diversity, how we're going to think differently about recruitment, upskilling, retention, how we're going to work with the industry. Let's use every resource we have at our disposal, because our overseers on the Hill will say, we've given you a lot of authorities, and you're not using them all. And some of that's true, because as we look at second and third order kind of implications, sometimes it can be difficult to employ sometime, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't. But we got to do better on this here, and we are not the font of all knowledge of ideas on this on the government side. I'll tell you one other key partner on this is Undersecretary Gil Cisneros, the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness. He's all in on this too, and Dr. Martell at CDAO is going to be a critical partner on this. So we've got to have a workforce that looks different, looks like America, is diverse, is mobile, is agile, and is innovative. And that really is our secret sauce, folks. And I welcome your thoughts on this as we have future engagements going forward.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned testimony. So a little bit of a war story real quick. One, now that I'm retired, I'm having a glass of wine, and while John maybe was thinking about a glass of water. Actually, last summer, you had testimony. I was listening to his testimony while sitting on the beach, and then I sent you an email that said, good job. So that's a little bit of the difference. Yeah. So anyway, a little bit of the difference. Hey, I'm going to go to the audience question in just a second, but I wanted to get a couple things in. You talked about a modernization strategy for software. You mentioned DevSecOps. That's a huge thing that everybody's involved in. Talk a little bit about the problems you're facing and how you're approaching that.
So part of this is there's so much energy behind this in DoD. It's like a healthy, aggressive energy. And part of what I have to do as CIO is get the road set and get the hell out of the way sometime on this. We put the left and right boundaries here on this, and the creative energy that's behind DevSecOps, behind the software community, making sure they have the environments to do the work they need to do in, making sure, yes, we need to set out policies, back to those bumpers on either side of the road here, on things like continuous ATO, on things like open source software, on containerization standards, on cloud first guidance, but tapping into what, for example, the services have done with their clouds, whether it's in the Air Force, Navy, Army, all across there. Making sure as we look at the innovation in the software factories, we're not overly homogenizing something, but also having some rationalization. So you want some of the many flowers blooming, but you also need to be driving towards common good, and how do you operationalize this? You know, our overseers on the Hill, we're looking at the current markup language that's getting some press here, about looking at how much software we have in the department that may not be working. I think that's a good thing to get after, and I welcome that. Looking at how we make that experience better. And this gets back to the user experience piece, not only for the software mavens who are developers and writing code, but just the broader workforce who leverage software for their day-to-day job. And then finally, very importantly, as we think about security of software supply chains, you all are so familiar with SolarWinds, other things we've dealt with, and not only something like SolarWinds, but something like Log4j that was in open source software since probably 2013. A noble intent sort of thing, but it was there just kind of waiting to be discovered and blow up in our face and ruin a lot of people's holidays over last year. But I say this because that's the kind of the unfun part of, because when you think about code writing and software development, but we got to guard what we're doing on that too, and making sure we have the sort of cybersecurity we need. So that's what we want to get after on this, is light touch may not be the right word, but making sure there's a North Star on this. We do the hard work of the standards, the policies, getting like JWCC in place so we can do even more of that, but also letting that creative energy run on this and let the women and men who are the software practitioners do what they have to do. That's how I see my role as CIO.
So you alluded a little bit to the Hill and budget.
Yep.
So question from the audience. The DoD faces a number of fiscal constraints. How will the CIO prioritize limited resources? Can you talk a little bit about the fiscal landscape, and are there specific areas and capabilities that you're deprioritizing in order to procure emerging modern technology to be able to compete globally?
So I'll tell you, with the latest president's budget that went to the Hill is robust for what we need in IT, cybersecurity, and C3. This was directly as a result of Deputy Secretary Hicks's leadership in getting the 23 budget together. Of course, we're about to enter the 24 build. The emphasis on the digital inflection point I talked about is well accepted from Secretary Austin on down. So I don't have any concerns about, now look, there's always trades we have to make, and I'll speak to this in a second, but we've got what we need across the enterprise, I'm confident, to do what we need to do on the digital and cyber landscape. In terms of deprioritization, we're always looking for areas, this is the more traditional CIO roles, as we retire data centers, as we get off of legacy, as we have the hard discussions across the services for areas like defense business systems, working with Comptroller and others. Those aren't fun discussions. A lot of these are dated, but they have a lot of work going into them. Those are the things we're trying to, shall I say, deprioritize. And also just getting away from technology that's not doing what we need to do. But I'll tell you, the growth areas in terms of what we do need to get after, like electromagnetic spectrum operations, we spoke about software, zero trust, et cetera. We've got plenty to sink our teeth into. So we are trying to get rid of legacy where we can and move to more modern technologies. But there's not a lot of fat on the bone here, but rest assured, we're trying to get after it through things. I'll give you one example, like Fourth Estate network operations, where we're trying to consolidate what the defense agencies and field activities are doing, and also getting after their legacy data centers and move to the cloud and so on. So we're getting after that, but I feel we're in a good, solid place. We just have to make it work.
Interesting question. It's kind of ubiquitous in so many aspects of what we're seeing in America. How concerned are you about supply chain issues?
The microchip issue has my attention very much. When I meet with a lot of you all from industry and your CEOs, I know that has a lot of concern, and also the fact that Taiwan is a major supplier of those, and obviously the risk that Taiwan lives under from the PRC. We talked about software supply chain in terms of ensuring that we just don't take the software at face value. SolarWinds taught us that, and we implement zero trust. Working the supply chain issues, I just had a great meeting the other day, for example, with our colleagues from the Defense Cyber Crime Center, DC3, and the Air Force IG, who oversees a lot of that there, and working with Office of Special Investigations and other criminal investigative services to make sure that we're looking at hardware supply chains, working with our Intel colleagues. We have to know that our adversaries are trying to get things in our baseline to hold us at risk. I've been pleased that we're trying to do things on the telecommunications front to get Huawei and ZTE by law off of our baselines. Anything the PRC's touched, I don't want anywhere near any of our equipment. But yeah, this is something we've all got to get after aggressively here and not rest on our laurels. And it gets back to the team effort part of this. And I'll say one other thing on this too. Back to the interagency piece, working with Commerce closely, working with CISA and DHS, and taking lessons learned, because this is an ever-evolving space. And then finally, I'll close on, I was taking this more to a counterintelligence adversary space. Yeah, and we've got supply chain interruptions from COVID, things that weren't of a malicious nature, but we just got to think thoughtfully about how we've prioritized, but I think we're in a pretty good spot there. So I'm more worried about the malicious threat and how we have to implement zero trust in everything we do.
So not singularly in your lane, but I'm going to give you a data question, if you can bear with me.
Sure.
The implementation of zero trust, how do you balance security and segmentation with the need to make data widely available?
That is a great question. You know, when we were really talking about zero trust, we've talked about it for years, but last year really hitting the throttle on that. I got a finger in the chest from different communities. Believe it or not, some Army surgeons who were in War College with my wife said, do not make it harder for us when we're downrange triaging And we've got to get data back and forth. Don't make this hard on us. I've heard about it from our good colleague and friend, Admiral Jeff Trussler, JT, the N2, N6. He said, John, you haven't seen what we have to do undersea in NC3 and other environments. Don't make it too hard on us there. And I could give you other mission examples. That stuck with me. So the balance here is, as we look at Zero Trust, and I can promise you Mr. Resnick is tracking on this, our Zero Trust PFMO lead, that we've got to balance this. And I tell you, those Army surgeons, that stuck in my mind about, and that could be amplified to any number of skill sets on the battlefield, in the airspace, at sea, you name it, that we've got to be able to make sure their system doesn't have a PRC or Russian adversary or others, Iranian, North Korean, lurking on there, but also in a way that they can be agile and nimble. So this is going to get to how we architect this. We're also blessed at DoD CIO. We've got a great senior architect named Sudha Vyas. She came over from the Navy helping us, and architecture kind of glazes people over, but this is what's going to get at this here, that we don't create bottlenecks or something that's going to make our operators stumble on this. And then we're going to start to scale this out, not one big bang either, starting with our most secure networks and going out. So we're very sensitive to that, and I also mentioned to Dr. Martell, to Craig, that this is going to have to be a close partnership with CDAO. There's going to be AI capabilities. Mike and I talked often about this, about that we can bring to bear against the data. And I want to also give a shout out to Admiral Bill Chase, the deputy of JFHQ Doden. When he was over in PCA, he mentioned about this and advocated heavily that we've got to be careful on the Zero Trust piece, not to over-segment ourselves in a way we can't do our mission.
So you alluded to this as a team of teams. This is a whole of government. So one of the questions is, can you talk a little bit more about the role that CISA will play in DoD cyber strategy?
So working with Jen Easterly and her crew there, a few different ways. Of course, as you look at the sector leads for U.S. critical infrastructure, and I know Mr. Allen is well aware of this in his leadership time at DHS. Working, CISA is kind of the traffic cop on a lot of this. We have got the DIB, not we CIO, but working with our policy colleagues at DoD for the defense industrial base sector. But what CISA is going to do is really working across the whole of government here, partnering closely with Cybercom and General Nakasone, staying in close touch with us. And I'll give you an example. I'm on the cybersecurity review board, the CSRB, that was stood up kind of like the NTSB to deal with Log4j, and we're getting a lot of interaction with DHS and CISA there. But it's got to be a constant information flow. And I got to give a props to another individual, Ms. Ann Newberger, the Deputy National Security Advisor, longtime NSA colleague. She helps keep those conduits of information open with Jen, with the rest of the interagency, with the IC, many of whom are in here tonight, as we work with NSA, CIA, and others. So it really does get to the team of teams. And maybe I'll just close on one issue. Jen coined the term shields up, which has almost become a moniker here since Ukraine started. And there was an article about a day or two that said, this is going to be how we live now. Because depending on how long Ukraine goes or whatever, we're just going to have to live in a shields up mentality. I see Jen as a real leader in this area. We were both in the White House together in the 9/11 time frame. I respect her immensely and look forward to working with her going forward on all this.
So we talked about this in advance, and this is a conversation you and I have had time and time again with our general counsels, where somebody walks in and says, well, if you meet with him, you got to meet with everybody else. So for everybody in industry, your chance to go, you're not necessarily going to get the contract sitting down and talking to me, but here's how you need to think about navigating the DoD CIOs, and how do you present to them? So
this is a tricky one, and the lawyers do put the fear of God into you on this, because I want to be fair to all of you. I want to, because a lot of you I've worked with over the years. I have the utmost respect for you individually. A lot have made the transition from government to industry. I've talked about a lot of the big companies. I love all of you equally, and I've probably made you mad equally at one point or another. If the CSPs are in there, they're probably nodding like, yep, John, we've been frustrated with you once or twice, but we also know you're an even player on this too. In terms of your question here, acquisition and sustainment, ANS has the ingress point to get in here. But what I can tell you here, And where's my Chief of Staff, Joe Callahan? Joe, raise your hand. He's in the very back there. He's helped me set this up. I get a lot of you on LinkedIn going, hey, I work at so-and-so, and I'd love to come brief you on this. I can't do unofficial stuff on LinkedIn. But what I can point you to is if you go to our DoD CIO LinkedIn page and come in that way, and this isn't some off-ramp to oblivion, we've got our comms team. We'll get you hooked in with ANS, and we'll get you in front of the right people. It may not be me. If you're going to talk, and I won't, one of the individuals I was talking with at the reception beforehand was in a pretty unique field here. I won't say it because I don't want to embarrass the person. It was highly technical and specific to our C3 team. That's who they need to talk to get this out here. So what I would say is you can go to our DoD CIO LinkedIn page. If appropriate, I'll meet with you and we'll look at the background and so on. But also, we'll get you into the ANS pipeline here. And what I will tell you, and this may not be a nourishing, perfect answer, but I want to be very honest with you. If you're a small or medium, you're probably thinking, how do I, get on your radar here? I've got the thing that's going to go on the thing that's going to create success here for our service members. This is something we got to keep working on at DoD. I'm still learning, to be honest, the best way to do this fairly and not the person who jumps the highest and gets in the door first, because I don't want to disadvantage everybody else with that. So that's about as honest as I can be there in terms of how we're best trying to keep this fair, above board, and equal. But I would ask you, come on in through the right avenues that I just laid out there, and you're going to have my commitment to make sure we get the right humans in front of you there.
So let me close out with a statement and a thank you. The statement is one that, actually a question I had a DI officer asked me one Sunday in the basement of the gym at DIA, and we were about 30 minutes into a workout. It was just the two of us Sunday morning, and the officer looked at me just out of the blue and went, "A lot of stress in your job?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Yes." And so for everybody here, for everybody in the Defense Department, and those that have some sense of what you took on when somebody said, "Hey, John, I need you to be the CIO," thank you.
Thank you.
For what you do.
Thank you.
So thank you, Bob and John, for that conversation. It was very enlightening, and I got a few laughs out of it, too. I'd also like to thank our sponsors this evening, Accenture Federal Services, AWS, CACI, Mantech, Oracle Quadrant, Raytheon Intelligence and Space, Rancher Government Services, Sandbox AQ, SAIC Sim Software, and TransUnion. And I would like to encourage all of you all to take the centerpieces off the table that are compliments of Accenture, take them home to someone you care about, and also enjoy the dessert reception following from CACI. And I would like to give Bob and John some of our newest INSA swag.
All right, so we stand up in this part?
Yeah. INSA swag is awesome.
So for the submarine.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
You want to take it off?
Oh.
All right, so this is a gratuitous advertising. There we go.
Yeah.
All right, John, there we go.
There you go. Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Well done.
Enjoy dessert.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, sure.